Come to the final evening tonight. It's great to see you all along here. Who's enjoyed the meeting so far? Everyone? That's fantastic. Well, as we were saying earlier, what we're going to be talking tonight is predominantly about diet. What I'm going to be focusing on to begin with, though, is I'm going to talk more about the diet that's conducive to liver detoxification and things that we can do to support our liver in health as well. Then later on in the evening, when Gary goes on to do his talk, he's going to talk to you a little bit more about diet and lifestyle in general. Okay, so we're going to be focusing on foods that assist the liver detoxification process. But to begin with, I just want to talk a little bit about the liver before we go on. The liver is the largest gland in the body. It's not actually the largest organ. The largest organ of the body, can anyone guess what that is? It's the skin, exactly. So next to the skin, it's our largest organ. It's a very, very important organ. Situated on the right-hand side of the body, up underneath the rib cage. It's quite a large one. It weighs around about 1.5 kilos. Okay. Functions of the liver. Now, the liver has over approximately 400 known functions. And there's still scientists are still finding new functions for the liver as research goes on. So it's quite an amazing organ. In fact, it's an incredibly vital organ to health. And this is why I want to focus on it this evening for you to explain the importance of the liver and things that we can do to promote health in the liver as well. One of the main functions, as I said earlier, we're going to be talking about is liver detoxification. It helps our body to break down toxins that are coming into our system, but it does many other things. A few of those other functions are things like the production of bile and bile salts. Now, bile is what our body uses to break down cholesterol and fats coming into our system. Bile is also a transport method of our body actually getting rid of cholesterol. So if we have excessive amounts, we talked about the other day about the importance of cholesterol in our diet and good fats in our diet. Our body has adequate ways of getting rid of those excessive amounts of fats and cholesterols from our system. And one of the ways, or the main ways that our body deals with that is via the bile. Removal of excess nutrients from the blood, things like high levels of sugars from our diet. It helps with pulling those out of the bloodstream. Also, maintenance of blood sugar regulation. It actually helps to store a number of nutrients which assist that process. It actually stores sugar in a usable form in the liver as well. It's involved with the manufacture of certain types of proteins, which are absolutely essential for things like maintaining fluid regulation in the body, keeping the fluids in the compartments that they're meant to be in. So people that have issues with edema, people that have issues with blood pressure problems and things like that, we certainly have to have a look at the liver and make sure that we're having adequate production of proteins via the liver. It also is involved with providing proteins that are essential for, or essential component as part of the immune system as well. This is one of the most important functions of the liver, though, apart from liver detoxification, is the storage of certain types of minerals and nutrients. Things like iron, and copper. Glycogen is our usable form of energy. Has about 4 hours of energy stored up in the liver there for our body if we need it. That's for an emergency. Vitamins, our fat-soluble vitamins, these are our antioxidants. Vitamins A, vitamin D, vitamin E, and vitamin K is important for coagulation of our blood to keep our, from, like if we get cut, to stop us from over-bleeding and bleeding to death. Vitamin B12 is a really important one. Now, I'm sure that Gary is going to talk to you a little bit more about the importance of that later on this evening, but I just want to focus for a moment. In the vegetarian diet, many of us find it's quite difficult to get adequate levels of vitamin B12, particularly for those that have a vegan diet. They don't have any animal products at all. Vitamin B12 is only contained in animal products. It's not contained in any vegetable sources, unfortunately. Some people say, well, I've heard it's contained in mushrooms and different things like that. The only source that I do know of is there's a very small amount in a certain type of seaweed, certain type of kelp. But apart from that, we don't really get it from a vegetable source. Mushrooms, when they actually had a look into why they found it contained in mushrooms, it was actually contained in the fertiliser or the manure on the outside of the mushroom when they were doing the testing. So once again, came from an animal source. Vitamin B12 is essential for proper nerve function. It's also essential for the replication of our cells and protecting our DNA in the reproduction of cells. If any of you have issues with memory and concentration and cognition, sort of being able to really concentrate on things, then certainly B12 may be something that would have to have a look at addressing there also. Now, typically for people that have been on a meat diet and then have changed to a vegetarian diet, you'll find that your body, it takes a little while to adjust to that process. People that have been, let's say, a second or third generation vegetarian tend to actually be able to survive a little bit easier on a vegetarian style diet with their B12 levels. And that's the reason for that is our body actually does produce a very small amount of B12 on an ongoing basis. But you'll find people that have been on a meat eating diet, their body is actually used to the B12 coming in from the meat source, and it takes quite some time for the body to actually get used to producing its own B12 at adequate levels. So you do have to be very careful if you've gone from a meat-eating diet to a vegetarian diet. Usually we find that in that process, after the first couple of years, all the B12 stores are actually used up. And initially, people that go onto that vegetarian diet after they've been on meat, they're fantastic, they're going great, they feel really great, but after a couple of years, they go downhill. They dive down. The energy, concentration, all these types of things really reduce significantly. And one of those main reasons is because of the B12. So we certainly need to make sure we're getting plenty of that in our diet. Certainly one of the most important functions of the liver is detoxification of harmful substances, and that's what we're going to be focusing on this evening. So I won't talk about that too much at the moment. And finally, things like breaking down old, worn-out red blood cells and certain types of bacteria. You find that one of the biggest loads on the liver, believe it or not, is actually the broken down cell walls of bacteria that our body is constantly fighting and breaking down and trying to get rid of as well. So it's responsible for that. It also plays a role in the activation of vitamin D. Now, vitamin D, we've talked about, it's actually stored in the liver. It's an antioxidant, a very important antioxidant, but it's also produced via exposure to the sun. This is one of the laws of health that we spoke about a little earlier on the first evening. So it's very, very important that we get out in the sun. But not only do we need the sun to produce it, we need a good, healthy liver to be able to produce and activate that vitamin D once we've produced it also. Vitamin D is not only a powerful antioxidant, but it's also essential for putting calcium or the depositing of calcium into our bones. So as we get older, it's essential that we're getting plenty of sunshine, making sure that we're not getting excessive amounts, but certainly adequate levels, say 15 to 20 minutes of exposure to the sun, particularly in the morning, every day, and we're keeping our liver working and functioning properly to make sure that we put calcium back into our bones. Also, we talked about the way that calcium actually leaches from the bone. in my lecture on Tuesday evening as well. So we certainly, one of the most important things we need to have a look at is addressing the increase in acidity in the diet and in the lifestyle, coming back to those laws of health and making sure we're reducing that acidity, that acid stress on the system, which causes our body to leach calcium from the bones as well. Okay, now the liver has an incredible venous network, which is a series of veins and also arteries which feed it. It's quite amazing actually. And this is where we get the absorption of nutrients from the foods that we eat. As it passes through, it's picked up by the portal vein system and it's carried through and processed via the liver. That's quite amazing. Now that's great if everything's working correctly, and you'll find that in health, when everything's working fine, it will really work well and we'll get lots of nutrients being absorbed and being processed efficiently. But in disease, we find that these days many people have sluggish transit time with their digestion. We're not actually processing the foods as quickly and efficiently as possible. In that process, we often get toxins being produced. As we get sluggish digestion, we start to get fecal matter and different things building up in the large intestine. It starts to compact in there, and then we start to get a fermentation process, and we start to get reabsorption of some of the toxins produced because of poor transit time or because of this impacted fecal matter in the colon and the large intestine. So it's really important that we actually have a look at our elimination organs when we're coming back to the function of the liver and making sure our liver's working adequately. We really need to come back to the digestive tract and make sure that our small and our large intestine, or our colon, is really nice and clean. In fact, this is probably our biggest source of load of toxins on the liver, is from the digestive tract. Every day, we're exposed to between 5,000 and 10,000 different chemicals. Of those 5,000 and 10,000 different chemicals, the majority of them are coming in via the foods that we eat. For that reason, approximately 40, even 50% of our immune system is actually lining our digestive tract. That way we need to make sure that the immune cells are there to break down any load that might be causing problems on the immune system also. Now moving on. Just having a look at this also. So we've talked about endotoxins are basically the broken down cell walls of bacteria and organisms and even hormones that are broken down in our body. Our body will actually process them and it will eliminate them into the small and the large bowel. But if our transit time is sluggish, if we're not actually regular every day, having a couple of bowel movements every day, then what can happen is we can actually start to reabsorb those toxins back up into the bloodstream again. Another interesting thing is that we find that the liver and many other organs of the body tend to be very dehydrated. We need a minimum of 2 litres of water a day coming in every single day. And I'm sure Gary talked about this on the first evening. When we don't replace that amount of water coming into our bodies every day, then what happens is that things like digestion, which require large amounts of fluid to get the process working correctly, and perspiration, elimination of toxins via the kidneys and urination, things like that which are essential, our body starts robbing fluids from organs to keep the system working correctly. Unfortunately, in that process, we start to dehydrate those organs and therefore those organs don't work effectively. It's important that we drink adequate levels of fluid and we actually absorb those fluids via the portal vein system so we can actually rehydrate our organs such as our liver and make sure it's working adequately also. Now, the liver really is our main filtration system of our body. If there's one main filtration, it's the liver. The other minor filtration system, I guess you could say, is the kidneys. The lungs do help that process also, and there's certain other areas, the spleen, which plays a role. The most important organ in the body for filtration of toxins is certainly the liver. And it doesn't matter what sort of toxins coming in, they're all processed via the liver. It operates in a 2-step process, and this is what I want to talk to you about this evening. It's quite a complex process, and I want to really try and simplify it for you this evening. After we've been through this process, then I'm actually going to talk to you about things that we can do via your diet and lifestyle, but particularly diet-related things that we can really help to support liver detoxification and get this process working correctly. The process of liver detoxification is often referred to as biotransformation, and this is what we're going to be talking about right now. Before we move on though, I want to first talk about the way that the liver actually processes things. The first part of liver detoxification is what we call phase 1, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But the thing I want you to remember here is that phase 1 is controlled via enzymes in the liver. Now, as toxins come through, now when we talk about toxins, we usually think of harmful, terrible chemicals and pesticides and heavy metals and all those types of things. And certainly they are all toxins to the body. But there are certainly some broken down products which are actually also useful. In fact, it's very important that we process things for proper immune function. They're broken down via the liver, via these enzymes also. So not everything that goes through the liver is actually a harmful substance, and it's not all broken down in a bad way. But there's many things that are broken down via the liver, via these enzymes in phase 1. I want to talk to you at the moment. You'll find that in recent times in research, we've been looking at the importance of herbal and drug interactions. Now, can I see a raise of hands, how many of you are actually taking some sort of pharmaceutical medication at the moment? It's a few of us, so I really want you particularly to be listening here for a moment. The enzymes which are actually activated via the detoxification process are activated by many types of things, not just toxins. It might be a pharmaceutical drug, it might be a herb, it could be a nutrient, it could be a hormone, it could be many things that coming into the liver. The liver, as I said, doesn't discriminate between good and bad things. It processes everything alike. So when we have toxins, when we have hormones, when we have whatever going into the liver, it actually upregulates these enzymes. It makes the enzymes more active. This is important to remember. So the more toxins, the more things coming into the liver, the more active these enzymes become in phase 1 liver detoxification. Now, that's great. It certainly helps our body get rid of toxins quicker. But let's take an example for a moment. I've got a pharmaceutical medication up there at the moment. It doesn't really have to be any particular type of pharmaceutical medication. When we take a herb, it actually speeds up those enzymes, as I was saying. It also speeds up the way we process pharmaceutical drugs. Now, you'll find that most pharmaceutical drugs have what we call a half-life, or an active time where they're actually in our body doing the job that they're required to do. Now, I just want to focus here, I'll just mention here for a moment, I'm not necessarily condoning the use of all pharmaceutical drugs, but certainly I want you to take note for this for a moment, that if you are taking some pharmaceutical preparation, you do really need to be cautious of this at the moment. Okay, so then if we were to take a herb, or maybe some fruit juice, certain types of fruit juices and things, can actually have quite an impact on these enzymes. Now I want to take one that's well known, a herb at the moment. Does anyone know what this herb up here is called? Hypericum. Very good. It's St John's wort. St John's wort's quite a well-known herb. Most of us have probably heard of St John's wort. Echinacea is another common one that many of us have heard of also. But I want to talk about St John's wort for a moment. St John's wort, when our body processes it, what it does is it speeds up those enzymes. Now, as a pharmaceutical drug is in our body, it's there doing its job. It might have a half-life of what we say 4 hours or 8 hours. It's meant to be in there for those 4 or 8 hours doing its job. If we were to take St John's wort while we're taking that drug, then what would happen is we'd actually speed up the clearance of that drug from our system because we're actually upregulating the enzymes. So we'd get rid of that drug much faster from our body. That's possibly a good thing, but it's also a bad thing for people that are taking drugs that actually have a very small leeway and what we call a lethal dose index. They can actually build up in their system in very high concentrations, or they may be so low in their bloodstream that the drug isn't actually doing anything at all. Now, St John's wort actually speeds up the clearance of that from our body. So if you're taking something like digoxin or lithium or phenytoin, things that are used for very serious conditions like epilepsy and cardiovascular disease and conditions like that, and you think that the drug's in your system doing its job, you may actually be clearing it out from your system much quicker than you thought, or much quicker than you realise. So you take your dose every 4 or 8 hours or whatever the recommended dosage was, but you may be clearing it from your system much faster. On the other side of that, you could be taking something like grapefruit juice. Now, grapefruit juice does the exact opposite. It actually slows down the enzymes in phase 1. So what we could be doing here is we could actually be building up lethal doses of that drug in our system. Once again, particularly things like phenytoin, digoxin, lithium, those ones have a very small lethal dose index. So we take our dose every 4 hours, and normally the drug would be cleared from our system after 4 hours, but it might still be there after 8 hours. We take our next dose after 4 hours, then our next dose after 4 hours, and you can see that that drug's going to continue to build up and up and up in very high concentrations in our body, and it can be quite dangerous. So what I just really want to stress here before we move on is the fact that if you are on some sort of pharmaceutical preparation, that you do actually talk to someone that knows a little bit about herbal and drug interactions, or a naturopath, or someone that can advise you on that. Don't just go out and start self-prescribing, because a lot of people do that these days, and we can certainly get ourselves into some tricky situations. Okay, now this is a picture of liver detoxification simplified for you. It's really not that difficult to understand. Okay, all I want you to really take away from that is that we've got up here, first of all, we've got toxins. That's toxins from external sources, toxins from internal sources such as hormones, the breakdown, or we talked also about acids. Our body becomes extremely acid. Those acids are often toxins that the liver will need to process also. There's a very interesting website actually that you may be interested to look up. It's called, it's www.bodyburden.org, BODYBURDEN.org. And on this website, they actually have a trial that they did. It was only a very small scale trial on 7 individuals. Now, of these 7 individuals, they tested for 210 different environmental toxins, including heavy metals, pesticides, petrocarbons, and all these types of different things coming into the system. And of those 210, they found that every single one of those 7 people in that trial had a minimum of 71 different environmental toxins of some sort in their body at that one time when they tested them. And that was only of the 210. From what we know at this stage, there's over 300,000 different environmental toxins and pollutants that can come into our body every day. And they only tested for 210. And there was 71 of those 210 in those 7 people that they tested. So it really gives you quite an idea of the exposure that our bodies have to environmental toxins coming into us every single day. It's unbelievable, actually. So those toxins come in to what we call phase 1 of liver detoxification. When they enter that, what happens is they're broken down and then they're neutralised by phase 2, and then our body excretes them. So I just want to give you a visual at the moment. You don't have to take too much away from that, and we'll explain that as we go along. Now, phase 1 talked about the enzymes. What these enzymes are called, they're called the cytochrome P450 enzymes. CYP450. I don't expect you all to remember that, but this is the enzyme system, and scientists are finding that there's actually several different types of enzymes in that enzyme system, and they're all responsible for the breakdown of different types of toxins and pharmaceutical preparations and hormones and things like that. Phase 1 basically breaks a large particle or a large toxin into very small pieces. That's it. Simplified, that's what phase 1 does. So if we were to take a large chemical and to just break it here, 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 and here into very small particles, when we had one, we might have maybe 5 or 500 different small pieces that we've broken up. So that really is the role of phase 1. It's just to break that toxin up into very small particles. The role of phase 2 is then to take those small particles which have been broken up by phase 1 and to actually make them water soluble. Now, all toxins in our body are fat soluble toxins. That's why it's essential that we have adequate levels of good fats, such as cholesterols, in our diet coming into us every single day. It's absolutely essential. We have adequate levels of those. But we want to actually make them water soluble so we can get rid of them via the urinary system and via the bowel more effectively. And this is what phase 2 detoxification does, neutralises those substances. Phase 1, it doesn't matter what we do to phase 1, the more toxins we have coming into our system, the more active it becomes. Now, things that speed up phase 1 are classically things like alcohol, caffeine, cigarettes, basically any environmental toxin or pollutant that we can take into our system. It speeds up that process incredibly. Phase 2, on the other hand, is what we call nutrient dependent. It means that we need the nutrients in our body there to neutralise those toxins from phase 1. If those nutrients aren't there, then we have nothing, we don't have the building blocks to neutralise those toxins. And this can be a major problem. And I'm going to talk about what those nutrients are that we can use to neutralise them effectively in a moment. But first I want to talk about what can occur if we don't have those nutrients. If we don't have those nutrients, what we have is a very, very tricky situation. We have a lot of toxins coming through phase 1 of the liver, where we're getting these toxins being broken down into very small particles. These particles are what we call a metabolite, an intermediary metabolite. If they're not neutralised, they can actually create major havoc to the system. I'm going to give you an example for a moment. We'll take alcohol. It's quite a well-known substance that has an effect on the liver. Alcohol is quite a toxic substance to the liver, but it also is actually a natural breakdown or a byproduct of many different chemical reactions in our body. Our body actually produces alcohol in the breakdown of certain substances. So in itself, although it's toxic to the liver, it's a natural occurrence in our system. But the unfortunate thing is, as alcohol is broken down via the liver detoxification, it's broken up into very small particles which are called aldehydes. And these aldehydes are similar to substances. Has anyone heard of formaldehyde? Formaldehyde is a substance which is typically used for embalming bodies, dead bodies. It's an extremely carcinogenic or cancer-forming toxin. It is incredibly toxic, not only to our liver, but to every cell of our body. It's a very, very dangerous environmental toxin. The byproducts from the breakdown of alcohol are actually very similar, almost identical to formaldehyde, and their effect is almost identical also. Quite amazing. We need to make sure, certainly, that we're neutralising those substances, but even taking things like that into our system is going to create a real big load on our liver that we don't need. So we really have to be careful of taking substances. Caffeine is identical also in its results, and the breakdown of these metabolites are extremely toxic, incredibly carcinogenic and cancer-forming to the body. Okay, so there's many types of things that we can do to actually help to neutralise these toxins. This is actually a picture of liver detoxification again, but it's just showing different things that can actually speed up or slow down the liver detoxification process in phase 1 and also phase 2. And I'm going to talk about these substances in a moment. But with liver detoxification, it's important that we actually that we support both phases of liver detox. Sometimes it's actually important, though, that we actually slow down phase 1. Now, by slowing down phase 1, what it means is we're actually reducing the amount of toxins coming in to the second phase of liver detox, which means that we don't have to have as many substances in the liver to actually to neutralise those toxins coming through. The more toxins we have coming into our body, the more environmental factors coming in, the greater the load on our system to really neutralise those toxins effectively. So what we want to have a look at is not only substances which help to support the second phase of liver detox, but actually substances which slow down that first phase and what we call modulate, or they're called a bifunctional modulator. They regulate that liver detox process. So they slow down phase 1 and speed up phase 2 to really support our body to make sure we're neutralising those toxins effectively. Now, it all sounds quite complex at the moment. I'm getting sort of a few odd looks on your faces. Really, it's actually very, very simple. And that's good news for us all. It's really very, very simple. All we need to do is actually include some really simple fruits and vegetables and different things that I'm going to talk about in a moment that have a wonderful effect on supporting both phases of liver detoxification quite effectively. But in this process, we can do many things to actually support the liver detoxification, but first we have to have a look at the environmental toxins coming into our system first. We've talked about all toxins are fat soluble, and Tuesday when we talked about the acid-alkaline balance, all those toxins and acids which are produced from an imbalance in our acid-alkaline balance put a strain on the liver. The first and most important thing that we have to do if we want to actually support our liver is go back to the 8 laws of health. Once again, I can't stress this enough, that these are the foundational principles. If you want a good, healthy liver, then you have to start with the basics. You have to be drinking your water. You have to be getting your regular exercise. You have to be getting adequate fresh air and oxygen. You have to be getting adequate rest. You need to be on a good diet. And certainly abstaining from harmful toxins and environmental pollutants and things, and really minimising the effects that they're having on the liver also coming into the system. So what can we do to assist the process? At Living Valley Springs, the detoxification program that we run actually assists this process in a really wonderful way. The first part of the cleansing program that we run actually is responsible for really helping to clean up the elimination organs. Now, this is actually a very important place to start. Once we've had a look at the 8 laws of health, we've made sure that we've got them balanced right. The next thing we need to do is make sure that our kidneys and our bowels are working effectively. If they're not, once these toxins start coming out of our body, we don't want to reabsorb them back into our bloodstream again. We need to make sure that we're getting rid of them effectively. So the first part of the process, or the cleanse process at Living Valley Springs, really focuses on that, on assisting the elimination organs of the body. The second part of the cleanse, we actually move into using things like juices and herbal teas, which have herbs in them, which specifically work on liver detoxification. And we're going to talk about some of those herbs and some of the nutrients and things that you can do to assist that process at home as well. And you don't necessarily need to go and do a full cleanse program, although that would be ideal. Some people don't always have access to that straight away, and you may want to start in a small way at home until you can eventually come and do a cleansing program and really get a lot deeper. So certainly supplemental agents and different things that we can take on an ongoing process to support this 2 phases of liver detox. The first thing I want to talk to you about is some foods that are available, and then we'll talk about some herbs. And these are really simple foods that most of you probably include in your diet, and you don't even know that they're actually good for the liver detox process. The first one I'll talk about is lemons. Okay, there's a substance in lemons and limes called limonene. Limonene is a volatile acid. It's particularly contained in the skin or the rind of lemons and limes. And this substance, limonene, is probably one of the most effective substances you can take on an ongoing basis to support the liver detoxification process. At Living Valley Springs, when people leave the program, what we do is we design a program specifically for you when you go home. One of those things we recommend for everyone when they leave the program is to start their day in the morning. The first thing when you get up is to have a couple of glasses of water, say 2 to 4 glasses of water with a squeeze of fresh lemon juice or lime juice. I think I mentioned this the other day in my pH talk when we were talking about the acid-alkaline balance. Lemons actually help to alkalize the body. Not only do they alkalize the body, but they actually really support the liver detoxification process. So this is the thing that I would encourage you to do, is just start your day. first thing before you do anything else is get up and have a couple of glasses of water with some fresh lemon juice in there also. There's another substance contained in sesame seeds. Sesame seeds, and there's several types of seeds. Also, pumpkin seeds have some substances contained in them that support this process. But sesame seeds particularly contains a substance called sesamin. Makes sense? And sesamin supports particularly the second phase of liver detoxification. It really helps to actually neutralise the toxins which are coming into the liver and help our liver cope with those toxins and neutralise them effectively. So having adequate levels of sesame seeds in your diet on a daily basis is a great thing. One other thing that we recommend to all our clients coming through is on their breakfast, they grind up a whole mixture of nuts and seeds. Some of you may have heard of LSA. It's a mixture of linseed, sunflower seeds and almonds. We've got our own mix, which we add sesame seeds and sunflower seeds to that mix also. Is there one other I'm missing? Pumpkin seeds. And we call it SLAP, or SLAPs, with an S. And that's sunflower seeds, linseeds, almonds, pepitas or pumpkin seeds, and sesame seeds. If you grind them up, make enough for a few days at a time. Now you find as soon as you grind them, they actually start to oxidise. They become rancid. So a lot of people buy them in packets from the supermarket or from a health food store. You'll find that you really don't want to do that, because as soon as you grind them, they already start to actually oxidise and the oils become rancid. You want to make it up fresh. If you want to make enough for a week, you can actually grind it up and store it in a container in the freezer, and that will slow down the oxidative process, and you can maybe keep it for no more than 5 to 6 days in the freezer. And after that, whatever's left over, you want to throw that out and make up a fresh batch. But I definitely encourage you to do that, to grind up those nuts and seeds. It doesn't have to be those particular ones, but they're the best. You can add in other types of nuts also and sprinkle them on your breakfast in the morning. They're not only great for the liver, they have many other really great minerals, and they're a really good source of essential fatty acids and fibre also. The next thing I'll talk to you about is turmeric. Now, turmeric contains a substance called curcumin. I can't speak highly enough of this. It's a herb, a culinary herb. We also use it as a therapy or as a therapeutic herb for many different conditions. It's one of my herbs of choice in cancer therapy. If we're actually assisting the body and really trying to give as much antioxidants as we can, turmeric is the #1 herb there. There's another herb which it's debatable whether it's as good or better, but certainly turmeric is probably one of the best herbs. Now, turmeric in its culinary state, usually most people use the powder, and that's fine, but the powder contains quite a high level of oils, and as soon as you actually powder it up in that process, you'll find that those oils will degrade over a period of time, and they won't be as effective for the liver. So if you want to use turmeric, the best way to do it is to buy it fresh. Buy it, you find it actually looks like ginger. It's very similar to ginger. It's in a root or rhizome, but it's a little bit more yellow. The only thing you will have to be careful of is people will know that you're using it because you'll have yellow fingers. So be very careful when you're actually grating it up. You can grate it up or chop it up in your cooking and use that fresh and in cooking as well on a regular basis. I'd really encourage you to do that. It's really wonderful for this liver detox process. And this is one of the herbs or one of the nutrients that not only actually helps the second phase of liver detox, but it actually modulates or regulates that process, so it slows down phase 1 if it's overactive, as well as supports the phase 2 liver detox as well. So it's certainly one of the better things to do on an ongoing basis. Next thing I'll talk to you about is green tea. Now, green tea, many of us have heard of green tea because of its antioxidant properties. It contains a substance or substances called polyphenols. Polyphenols are potent antioxidants, and they particularly support neutralising of these toxins that come into the liver. It's very, very important that we neutralise them effectively. Now, we don't have to have green tea. There's many other ways of getting antioxidants on a regular basis, but I certainly highly recommend the use of green tea. Now, you may ask, well, Doesn't it contain caffeine? Green tea does actually contain a very small amount of caffeine, but it's certainly negligible. It's much less than black tea or coffee. In fact, it contains the same amount of caffeine as some more commonly known herbs that we use on a regular basis as well. So it's certainly not an issue with the caffeine or even the tannins that it contains. The antioxidant properties that you get from drinking it on a regular basis will really help to support that liver detox process. So I can't speak highly enough of regular use. And when I talk about green tea, I'm not just talking about tea that you buy from the supermarket in the little tea bags. If you can get loose leaf green tea, that's the best form. So buy its loose leaf form from a good quality herbal place or a Chinese herbal place or something to get the best properties out of it if you're going to use it on an ongoing basis. Have I missed anything? Okay, cruciferous vegetables. Now, who loves broccoli? Who loves Brussels sprouts? Oh, not so many. Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, kale, turnip, cauliflower, I heard someone mention. Also some sulfur-containing vegetables like onions and garlic. All these vegetables really help to support this liver detox process. They contain many substances. One of those substances is called isothiocyanates, which is a sulfur compound, which actually specifically supports the second phase of liver detoxification. One of the pathways in the liver of liver detoxification is what we call the sulfonation pathway. It's dependent on sulfur coming into our diet. It's organic sulfur from the foods that we're eating. So those cruciferous and brassica vegetables, like we mentioned, the cauliflower, the broccoli, the cabbage, the kale, all those types of wonderful things that we love so much, we really need to be eating them on a regular basis. I would say at least 3-4 times a week, maybe even more. There's also some herbs. Turmeric is a herb which we can use in our cooking. But there's just some herbs that we may not use on an ongoing or a culinary basis that we can use to support this process also. Probably the only one I really want to mention here is St. Mary Thistle. Now, St. Mary Thistle is a powerful antioxidant. In fact, it's probably one of the best known, apart from dandelion, it's probably one of the best known herbs for the liver. And it really supports this process. It's probably the most effective regulator of liver detoxification. So if we want to actually do a more intensive liver detox process, then having St. Mary Thistle will really help to support that process and make sure that we're not actually producing too much toxins and our body's not able to neutralise them effectively enough. St. Mary Thistle, there's many ways that you can get it. You can buy it in the powdered form and make a tea out of it. At Living Valley Springs, we have a number of products. Some of you may have seen some of our products out there. One of those products that we do have is known as breakfast herbs. Now, in the breakfast herbs, it has many different types of herbs which are designed to specifically support different systems of our body, including the immune system, including the digestive system, including the blood, the liver, all those types of things, and then the adrenals. And one of those ones contained in it is St. Mary Thistle. So if you want to actually take St. Mary Thistle on an ongoing basis, one way that you could do that is by taking the breakfast herbs sprinkled on your breakfast every morning or every day. You can make it in a liquid form if you want, if you don't want to sprinkle on your breakfast. But certainly taking that on an ongoing basis will really help to support the liver detox process. They're the main foods that we can actually include in our diet to really support that process. I can't, though, stress enough the importance of adding plenty of good fruits and vegetables. All our fruits and vegetables will really help to alkalise the body and actually reduce the toxic load coming into our system. And we talked about this a little bit earlier, and I just want to stress it again. The foundational principles here, we need to come back, we need to have a look at. We don't have to necessarily always go to specifics, but we need to just remember general things like our fresh air, our exercise, the use of water, a good diet, and avoiding the harmful substances like coffee and alcohol and environmental toxins coming into our system on an ongoing basis. That's really all that I had to talk to you about this evening. Now, just before I finish up, I just want to open up to the floor now. If anyone's got any questions regarding this, because I know it's quite a tricky process. Does anyone have any questions that they wanted to ask specifically what we talked about this evening? Then either I gather that I've lost everyone, or that everyone's completely understood everything I've said. That's a good thing. Hopefully it was the second question. The liver is an amazing organ. The question was, how long will it take to get the liver back into shape? The liver is an amazing organ. We can actually, I'm not suggesting you try this, but in medical science we can actually remove up to 2/3 of the liver, and within 2 to 3 weeks the liver can be completely regenerated to its full size. It's an amazing organ. But on an ongoing basis, our liver regenerates itself completely, apart from if there's any scar tissue formed in the liver, but it completely regenerates itself every 7 years. We can certainly speed up that process, and if your liver is in poor condition, you'd probably be looking at between 6 to 12 months on a dietary regime. If you want to actually do a liver detox and go more intensive, then certainly you could use some herbs and some juices and different things to speed up that process. And you could speed it up quite significantly. Anywhere, I mean, you could even do it within several weeks and really get it back to good working order again. But the most effective way to do it is on an ongoing basis, and 6 to 12 months is a good average for most people. Okay, the question was, do most herbs go with each other, or do some actually interact with each other and have an effect? Was that correct? On each other. Okay, yes, certainly some herbs can actually interact with other nutrients, slow down the absorption of those things. A classic example of that, which some of you may not know as a herb, is soy. We use soy in our diets on a regular basis. It's actually a herb as well as a food. Soy can actually contains a substance called phytic acid, and phytic acid actually slows down the absorption of things like iron and folic acid in our diet. So most of us as vegetarians tend to base our diets around things like soy, and particularly if we're not having a lot of iron source coming into our diets on a regular basis, we need to really be careful of having large amounts of soy. The way that I would suggest if you were going to have soy on a regular basis would be to have cultured soy products. By culturing, the bacteria that's involved in that process, they break down the phytic acid so that it's not an issue. So we absorb the maximum iron and folic acid from the foods and things that we're eating. But certainly many other herbs can actually have an interaction. So once again, probably not the best idea to just go and start self-prescribing before you actually have a chat to someone. But it really is specific and dependent on the individual in that process. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. That's fine. Yeah. Okay. No, that'll be fine. Yeah. Another question.
Many people are talking about different vegetables making inflammation to the body.
Yeah.
Is that with knowing that God gave us everything, is that true that different vegetables can make inflammation to different people?
The question was, can certain vegetables actually contribute to the inflammatory process? Certainly there's some factors in vegetables that can contribute to that process, but we talked about on Tuesday night about the real cause of inflammation in the body, and it was that the pH balance of the body. When we get that out of balance, and you'll find that if we're eating a good range of fruits and vegetables on an ongoing basis, then we're actually helping to alkalise the body, and that has a net effect in the long run of actually reducing inflammation. There certainly are some which can specifically contribute to that. One of the most important things, though, is actually having the best quality fruits and vegetables that we can get. you'll find that a lot of the issues these days with fruits and vegetables is not so much the fruit or the vegetable itself, but what's actually contained in that, the environmental pesticides and the sprays and the fertilisers which have been used in that process, more often what's contributing to that inflammatory process than anything. Yeah. The ideal pH. For those of you that weren't here the other night, the ideal pH does vary depending on what we're having a look at. The ideal pH for the cells is around about the 7 to 7.4. The ideal for the urine and saliva is around about 7.0, which is neutral on the pH scale, 2 hours after a meal. So when we need to measure it, 2 hours after that meal, it should be 7.0. And the ideal pH for our blood is 7.4. Okay. Have any more questions? Yes, another one. Mm-hmm. Certainly can. The question was, if your hormones are out of balance, can that affect the liver? One of the things the liver does actually process is hormones. Now, if we have excessive amounts of hormones in our system, particularly oftentimes what we look at is environmental hormones. What we call, one of the most common is xenoestrogens. And Gary talked a little bit about this in his lecture. Environmental estrogens coming in from our diet. The most common area where we get them from is environmental plastics. And certainly when we heat plastics, we actually get a release of these environmental or xenoestrogens coming into the atmosphere. We breathe it in. We also eat it in the form of food. You find that when we heat those plastics, it really causes those to be released. One of the most common ways that we get that is by microwaving foods. We use these plastic containers and then we microwave them. The friction from the microwaving actually causes those xenoestrogens to be released, and then we get them in the foods. It doesn't matter if it's food or water that we're heating up in that process, and we start to get them in. Also, I mean, often classically, a new car, that vapour, that smell that you can smell, the plastics there, xenoestrogens are coming off there. Water bottles that we leave sitting in our car for months on end in the heat, they start to release these xenoestrogens also. There's plenty of sources, external sources of these toxins coming in. And they all contribute and act as weak estrogens in our body. And the liver certainly has to process them quite significantly. But even if we're not getting those things in, which most of us are anyway, the liver does really have to deal with that, the recycling of hormones effectively. If we're not recycling our hormones effectively, then we can actually be very low in a lot of our hormones. And if we have a look at the hormone profile, we've done everything to try and correct it, and we've still got an imbalance, we really do need to come back and have a look at the liver. Do we have time for any more? One more. Is there any other questions? Yes. Okay. Food intolerances, the question was, some people actually have food intolerances. Is there anything you can do about it, or is it a lifelong thing? And that does depend on the individual. Unfortunately, I don't really mean to leave it open like that. Certainly, I have seen some people actually reduce their reactivity to certain types of things so they can have them, but there will always be a certain susceptibility in some people. One of the most common causes of food intolerances, though, comes back to the digestive tract. You'll find that our lining of our digestive system has a mucus coating. And there's many environmental factors that actually destroys that mucus coating. Things like alcohol, pharmaceutical drugs, many different types, particularly your non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Also certain types of antibiotics have an effect on that. By destroying the good bacteria, they break down that environment also. And we start to get what we call leaky gut syndrome, or where the small intestine starts allowing large particles of proteins to enter the bloodstream before they've been broken down into much smaller particles. When these large particles of proteins enter into our bloodstream, the immune system's there, and it doesn't recognise these large protein molecules. Normally they're much smaller. So it says, I don't know what you are, and the immune system starts attacking it. That causes the immune system to actually become hyperreactive and hypersensitive. So we start seeing hypersensitive reactions to lots of different things coming into our diet, and it might be things like tomatoes, it might be things like the most common things that people react to are wheat and dairy. The molecules that contained, or the protein molecules contained in wheat and dairy are almost identical to each other, and they're the most common things that we see on a regular ongoing basis. The most important thing if we want to reduce that sensitivity is getting the gut lining right. Once we've actually got the gut lining right, we've had a look at reducing any inflammation in the body, because inflammation can also contribute to destroying that lining also. Once again, we have to come back to the foundational principles, your fresh air, your exercise, all those things as well, making sure we're not contributing to inflammation. But once we get that digestive system balanced and the gut lining repaired effectively, then that certainly does reduce the load on the immune system, and oftentimes sensitivities can decrease quite dramatically. Okay, I think that's all we're going to have time for. Thanks everyone for your attention, and have a great evening.